So, that's generally how it works, isn't it? In relationships between a man and a woman. Always trying to fix, and they just want someone to listen. Angela and I have had a few of those conversations over the years, anyhow. So today, this video, like I said, it's a good introduction into what we're going to talk about today, and the idea that real relationships are sometimes challenging, sometimes tricky to navigate, and sometimes tough to get through. And hopefully you have found some time over the last couple of weeks to be reading through Song of Solomon, and have probably found, obviously for the most part, that most of the book is about this relationship between this couple, who serve as an example of, or a model, I guess, for God's design for marriage and for romance and for sex, has been more on the ideal side rather than what reality is. They've been kind of like the idea of like Ken and Barbie getting married. If you've read through, it's very picturesque most of the time through it. And for the first half of the book, if you've been reading through, they do everything seemingly right. They say everything right, they act all the right ways, they look perfect. And, you know, with all these overflowing words of love and affirmation, I don't know, are you getting a little sick and tired of the couple a little bit? I mean, it doesn't seem real, right? So today we're going to go maybe into more of the realistic side of it. So move from the ideal situation to the real situation, as this couple sort of encounters a bit of difficulty in their relationship. So some of that is, you know, is just the natural way that relationships work, right? Relationships are generally easy to start for the most part, and kind of start like if you were starting a marathon. I'm going to kind of give this analogy of the marriage relationship like running a marathon. If I wanted to run a marathon, I could choose to sign up, which would be very easy to do. I could go out and get the right clothes, the right shoes, which again would be very easy to do. And I could maybe even start a marathon okay. If you know me, it won't really last that long. So I could start out okay, right? And then soon after that, I would run into some difficulties if I was running a marathon. I wouldn't even remotely come close to finishing a marathon. I wouldn't, if I was honest, I would probably quit on a marathon if I was to run one, because there's no way I could kind of get through that. Because I haven't, I just don't have that ability in me. Relationships are a lot like a marathon. Marriage is designed to be like a marathon, right? It's in the course of the race, though, that we see that there are opportunities to call it quits if we want. And as you know, statistics say, obviously, more than half of, we'll say, marriage runners who start out a marriage race, they call it quits. And today we're going to talk about the reality of the hard work of making significant relationships work. So it doesn't even have to be within the marriage context, although obviously that will be a major part of our focus today. But even think about lifelong friendships that you've had. You've obviously probably gone through some difficulties through that, or it could be through business partnerships, all kinds of things where there's a close relationship that you're working together. You can kind of go through some difficulties in that. And so as these two people that we're going to look at sort of face some difficulty, face some sort of disenchantment with each other, but they commit to work through it. And we're going to look at that a little bit. So as you, like I said, probably noted, I was reading through this book, the couple who sort of stars in this song, they have their own way of talking about their relationship. So they describe their relationship like a vineyard, right? That they love to spend time in it. They like to tend to it. They want the vineyard to be fruitful and an enjoyable place. But they're also very aware that the relationship will be tested. And the way they describe it is in chapter 2, verse 15. It says, "Catch for us the foxes, the little foxes that ruin the vineyards, our vineyards that are in bloom." So in real life, a fox wouldn't destroy a vineyard in, one day or anything like that, but over time it could ruin a vineyard, right? So kind of the same way that we're going to look at that. They're kind of connecting those two together. So they are committed to protecting their relationship from those little things that can kill intimacy and spoil their sort of little world, their vineyard, so to speak. So today we're going to talk about 3 of those. We're going to call them little foxes that can kill our significant relationships, and how that happens over time, and then ultimately how we can protect ourselves from that. So the first one that we see in the book of Song of Solomon is in chapter 5. So the story unfolds, just a brief history. So the story unfolds with their courting and their dating one another. We move into the marriage, and then we move into sort of this honeymoon thing. So that's kind of leading all the way up through to chapter 4. And then chapter 5 just kind of makes this dramatic shift. And so we don't really know how long between the honeymoon and this sort of what we're going to look at today is. It could be something that's just a matter of days, it could be weeks, it could be months, we don't know, but there's seems to be a time shift there, right? And so this is seemingly their first sort of trouble in paradise as they're going to experience the inevitable conflict, which is our first little one. So the first one is unresolved conflict. So we're going to read along, and we're going to start in chapter 5, verse 2, where the scene in this book is the woman. She's in bed. She's not sleeping well because she's been waiting for her husband to come home. And this, seemingly, as we read this story, is supposed to be a night of intimacy, but he's late, and really late. And despite the fact that phones had not been invented yet, he should have called to say that he was going to be late. But anyhow, she sort of blows out the candles, goes to bed, and he comes in very late, talks about doing his hair, which means it's almost morning. So here we go. So in verse 2, it says, "I slept, but my heart was awake. Listen, my beloved is knocking." So this is him speaking. "Open to me, my sister, my darling, my dove, my flawless one. My head is drenched with dew, my hair with the dampness of night." So this wonderful man, or maybe he's even a little bit clueless, or maybe he's overcompensating here, I don't know, but he probably knows that he is in trouble, right? He can sense that he is in trouble because the room is locked. So he probably knows that he's in a lot of trouble. So he's saying, my sister, my darling, my dove, my flawless one. He's, trying to butter her up a little bit. So she's not in the mood for all that because obviously she is angry, as she should be, right? She's not going to get out of bed and just let him go on with that. So she says, "I've taken off my robe. Must I put it on again? I have washed my feet. Must I soil them again?" I think there is probably a sense of maybe some attitude on the must I do this stuff again. So she's not getting up just yet. She wants him to sort of feel her frustration, right? So he tries to open the door. It says, "My beloved thrust his hand through the latch." Oh, I had all of that other stuff in there. Anyhow, so he says, "My beloved, I thrust his hand through the latch opening. My heart began to pound for him." So he's outside in the cold, and he's trying to get in. But grace and love filled that place in her heart, and she was angry. I purposely went past. Sorry. I don't know why it's not moving now. Thank you. And so she decides to run and let him in. She even quickly places her hand in the jar of myrrh, which is expensive oil, that she would put on her body when it was time for a little something, something, and then runs to the door, and she's too late. So she says, "I arose to open for my beloved, and my hands dripped with myrrh, my fingers were flowing myrrh on the handles of the bolt. I opened for my beloved, but my beloved had left. He has gone. My heart sank at his departure." So she wanted him to feel her frustration, but not leave. right? She wasn't that mad, but now he is gone. So he has left. He's going to go sleep somewhere else for the night, wherever that is, and she has missed him. So now he is hurt, and he is frustrated. And at this point, we have a crucial decision. Two people who love each other and who have also hurt one another. So this kind of conflict is, of course, inevitable in the marriage relationship, right? But what separates relationships that stay healthy over a marathon is the response to that inevitable conflict. So she can bury this and just ignore it, whatever, kind of just put it deep down in, you know, he was kind of the jerk who was late in the first place, kind of a thing, right? And she can go, she could talk to her friends, and she could tear him down just to make herself feel better. Or she can wait for him to come back to her, because he ultimately is the one who kind of started it, right? But she is going to do what kind of love demands in a conflict. She's going to go and pursue him so that together they can kind of resolve this. I don't know why my thing is not working anymore, but anyhow. So she says, I looked for him, but did not find him. I called him, but he did not answer. The watchmen found me as they made their rounds in the city. They beat me, they bruised me, they took away my cloak, those watchmen of the walls. So obviously her search goes very badly in this situation. So she's out past curfew, and the town or the city's watchmen mistreat her, and since she's Solomon's wife, I'm sure this is actually going to go very badly for them later on, but anyhow, for now, she's outside of her protection of her husband. And so the main point of this part of which is the main part of what we're talking about here. So conflict has separated them, and she is outside that loving, protective arms and feels that vulnerability, right? So now she returns to the daughters of Jerusalem in our story. Thank you. Daughters of Jerusalem, I charge you, if you find my beloved, what will you tell him? Tell him I am faint with love. So she turns to them for some help, and they reply back, not going to, thank you. How is your beloved better than others? Most beautiful of women, how is your beloved better than others that you so charge us? So her friends say, why are you worried about this guy? You know, he's being a goofball like most guys generally are goofballs at some point. And why do you think he is any different than any other guy? Is he really worth all of this? There are so many other guys out there, you know, just, you know, cut the cord and let this one go. So how is she going to respond? I know we haven't resolved the sort of unresolved conflict little fox yet, but we're actually going to move into our next little fox that can destroy our relationship, and especially one like marriage. So the conflict is still unresolved, and she has gone out in great trouble to find him, and obviously doesn't want, and he obviously doesn't want to be found at that particular moment. So she is hurt, she's frustrated. Her friends have just sort of teed up this ball perfectly for her, right? She could speak badly of him, she could trash him, but she refuses to let that happen in her heart, right? Instead, she goes more off on the friends and defends her husband. She goes on for some time talking about how great he is, how unique he is, how she may be hurt now, but that doesn't allow her to forget why she loved him in the first place. So next, yes, thank you. I didn't know you'd moved. Thank you. My beloved is radiant and ruddy, she says, outstanding among 10,000. His head is purest gold. His hair is wavy and black as a raven. His eyes are like doves by the water streams, washed in milk, mounted like jewels. And she keeps going on for this for a few more verses, which we're not going to read because it's a bit over the top. So we're going to skip ahead. Verse 15. His appearance is like Lebanon, choice as its cedars. His mouth is sweetness itself. He is altogether lovely. This is my beloved. This is my friend, daughters of Jerusalem. So she might be hurt, right, and not so happy about some of the things, but she doesn't allow that to change the way that she sees him. She knows that they can work through this conflict. And she looks in her heart, you know, back before the hurt to remember what she appreciates about him. He is still the same one that she fell in love with. despite whatever that current situation, current pain that she's going through, right? So once we get hurt, it can be hard to kind of keep a generous lens, so to speak, in the way that we see other people, right? But that choice is actually considered by many marriage researchers to be the most important way to build a marriage that finishes the race, the marathon. So one such marriage researcher, his name is Dr. John Gottman, and he has done numerous studies on couples who don't make it versus those who do. And, he thought he had spent some time with couples, talking, interviewing them, and he thought he might come up with a list of, 9 or 10 things that maybe couples who seem to have a happy marriage, 30, 40, 50 years later, kind of what makes that happen. Why does that happen for them? And so according to his research, he actually found one thing. The biggest difference with married couples who rate their marriages highly after decades of marriage is kind of right here, right at this moment that we're reading. And as they talked to thousands of couples, he found that the one main difference with great marriages versus that ones were not so great is that the great ones had unrealistic, positive view of each other. So it wasn't that their spouses were perfect, as with anyone. There's no one who's perfect, right? We have plenty of negative that we could criticize if we want, but these couples just wouldn't go there. So even the research would bait them and try and get them to say something. It would be something for them that would be very easy to do, but they just wouldn't do it. Instead, they chose to see each other through a very positive lens and magnify those qualities. And this is not, natural, especially when we are hurt and when we're disappointed, but this is what love does. The most beautiful description of love anywhere can be found in 1 Corinthians 13. And one of the qualities that jumps out of that is that love believes all things, hopes all things, trusts all things. So in other words, love believes the best. It gives the benefit of the doubt. It chooses to maximize the positive and avoid nitpicking the negative. And that's a choice, though, and it's a tough choice. You and I have to choose to do this, to see each other through a generous lens, to magnify what we love about that person and see what people do right even better than what they do wrong. And that kind of creates this culture of grace and generosity and allows character change to happen in some of those areas that need that to happen in. But we can also choose to magnify the negative, can't we? To primarily see the deficiencies in the other person. Both are always there, and we have to be careful what we choose to focus on. So right now we're talking about this idea of criticism and contempt. So that's the little fox of criticism and contempt. So contempt is where you cross that line, where you've judged the other person, you found them to be unworthy of love. And when that takes over, this researcher that we were talking about, John Gottman, and his research, they found that it's almost impossible to recover from. Now, a disclaimer here is that he is not a believer. He's not coming from a Christian perspective, so he has maybe less hope than what we would have in a situation. But the danger is a very real one. So going back to our story, she chooses a generous lens, right? This doesn't mean that you don't communicate your hurt or your frustrations, and we're going to get to that. It just means that you don't allow those things to change how you view the person. You choose a generous lens that actually allows a place where people can be open to conversations about how the relationships could be better. So we're told in the Bible, in love, to honor one another, to encourage one another, right? To prefer one another, to use words that build each other up as opposed to words that tear each other down. So when we do that, it's much easier for the other person to respond when it's time to speak truth in love. And that's what Ephesians 4 tells us. It tells us about it. It's an opportunity to build an environment where you can work through issues together in the relationship. So what John Gottman found was that these couples had a minimum of a 5-to-1 ratio of positive affirmation to corrective conversation. So many of these had a much higher ratio than that, but I want you to think of it this way. I'm going to give you a little illustration here. So I have which Nathan loved this morning, trying to get pennies out of my jar of change that was around our house. But in a relationship, we can choose to affirm someone and express affection and acceptance, and it's like sort of throwing a penny into the bank, right? Into someone's, we'll call it their love bank, okay? So we're building up love within the relationship, and this is moving it up. But every time we criticize, every time we withhold affection or we tear them down, then we take pennies out, right? But what research has shown us is that it's not a 1-for-1, right? It's about 10. So I don't know if I can get 10 out in a shot here, but anyhow, as you can see, we're trying to quickly deplete the bank, right? If we have a couple more conversations where I'm more negative and all that kind of stuff, I'm going to take more out, right? So that's just the reality of how we are wired, right? So I'm sure any of you can think back to junior high, even however long ago that was for any of you, and we can probably still remember something negative that was said to us, right? It's very hard to remember the positives, but the negatives stick with us. And that's why, to compensate for the one negative, you need 10 positives, right? It's just the way that we are. And so whenever you take that sort of verbal bite out of your spouse or your significant other, you are taking sort of money out of that love bank, so to speak. So that gets overdrawn really quickly, and some of you maybe are there are no pennies left in your love bank kind of a thing. And when that happens, contempt for the other person starts setting in, because they are more like an enemy than like a friend. And it makes it easier for you to respond the same way. It spirals out of control. Contempt, reacting to contempt, right? And the relationship is doomed unless you're willing to work through that. So this week, I just want you to think about the lens that you are wearing and how important it is to speak words of affirmation, to be generous with each other, to be affectionate, to fill that love bank, so to speak. So work hard to put pennies in. So for married couples, you probably did this a lot, and I know this for myself. I did this a lot when you're dating, right? And so you can do it. It's something you can do. But it's something that usually over time in a marriage that kind of goes away a little bit. So whenever you criticize or tear down a person or withhold affection, then you're taking that money out again, right? So the little foxes of criticism and contempt are very dangerous ones, as they relentlessly eat away at intimacy of the relationship. So beware of that. However, we still have unresolved conflict that we haven't finished up with that one. We still have that there. So this couple does resolve it. She just doesn't ignore it, and she doesn't wait for him. She goes on to find him so that they can, resolve this hurt. The daughters of Jerusalem are out looking too, and they can't find him. So they come back to her, and they say, "Where has your beloved gone, most beautiful of women? Which way did your beloved turn, that we may look for him?" And so when they do, they are surprised because she has actually already found him. Or maybe he came back to her, but they have worked it out already, worked out their issues, and we know that because here's the result in verses 2 and 3. It said, "My beloved has gone down to his garden, to the beds of spices, to browse in the gardens and to gather lilies. I am my beloved's, and my beloved is mine. He browses among the lilies." So we don't have a record of the process of reconciliation, but we know the result. So by the time that the other girls come back to her, this couple has worked it out. They've probably enjoyed some intimacy together. The Bible talks a lot about this, about the need to work through our hurts with each other and not to stuff them or just ignore them or just explode in anger. Instead, we are told in Ephesians 4 this, "In your anger, do not sin. Do not let the sun go down while you are still angry. Do not give the devil a foothold." Don't let the sun go down on your anger, otherwise you give the devil a foothold in your relationship. Satan is always trying to pull us apart, and it makes it way too easy for him when we hold on to our hurt rather than resolve the conflict. And here's what God is saying in Ephesians 4. He says that you may sin against me by hurting me, but I sin against God and you if I let the sun go down without resolving that conflict. So Paul says, don't let that happen to your anger. And Ephesians 4 is a great chapter on conflict. And we don't have time today to kind of go through that all, but I would encourage you to read through that this week, even if you have time, that we are told to speak truth and love, that we are told to share our hurts and our feelings, but to do so in a loving way. And it tells us to be quick to forgive just as God forgave us, and to remember that the goal is not to win the fight, but to resolve the hurt and restore intimacy. So the truth is, close relationships of any kind are really hard, but marriage is actually crazy hard. Marriage is the process of two relatively incompatible people learning to become one, right? Conflict and hurt are an inevitable process of that. So what separates couples who thrive versus those who fall out is not conflict, but how conflict is resolved. Couples who thrive work through their stuff, and along the way they don't allow that hurt and disappointment to affect the way that they see the other person. They choose a generous lens and never forget what caused them to fall in love with that person in the first place. So all that is true, but we quickly read through a verse that I believe is actually very profoundly important, and will lead me to our last little one, which I can't make happen. Thank you. So, this is my beloved, this is my friend, daughters of Jerusalem. The word friend, I want you to note that. He is her husband. One day, Lord willing, they'll have children, and he will be a father, and he will be a provider and a protector to that family, but he is also her friend. And that is an important little word not to miss, because it is so easy in marriage to let that one drop off. So as we've read through this book, I hope that you've noticed how much they prioritize time with each other, cultivating their vineyard, their relationship, their little universe of two for the two of them. In the next, verses in chapter 6 and chapter 7, we see how much this couple makes a priority of growing the friendship factor in their marriage, spending unhurried time together. So this one I will call creeping divide. So the little fox to watch out for is this creeping divide, because it happens so slowly that we hardly notice it. When we are dating, we do all we can to build that friendship with one another, right? But it's very easy to let that drop off as you get into marriage. We get busy with our jobs, our careers, the idea of just the reality of life, of paying bills, doing things around our house, doing our own hobbies, spending time with the kids. We don't even realize how much we're neglecting our own friendship. And it's way too easy to do. One of the places that Angela and I will go out to eat with her parents is a little fish and chip place near our house. Oddly enough, fish happens to be one of Nathan's favorites, which is nice. So it's generally a positive experience. So any of you who've gone through the young kid stage, not too many restaurant experiences are positive experiences. So it's nice every now and then. But the reality is that it doesn't take long to be at this fish and chip place, and probably like a lot of fish and chip places, to realize the clientele is a little on the older side of life, okay? And so as we have spent time there, one of the things that I have noticed is that there are a number of couples who are there, and you kind of get looking around, but the idea is that nobody's really kind of talking to one another. You get sort of the, how's your fish, how's the coleslaw, I don't know, that kind of stuff. But it doesn't really seem like they're engaged in much conversation with one another, or they can even see couples that are, one's reading a book and one's just sitting there eating, like that kind of stuff, right? And occasionally, every now and then, there is a couple or two who are highly, and they're still in this, talking about the same age group, they're actually talking. They're actually involved in conversation with one another. They look happy to be with each other. They're looking each other in the eye and they're conversing. And they have obviously cultivated a very different kind of connection. and they are essentially friends, right? Married couples with a close connection keep building that friendship, meaning they do what friends do. They talk, they make time for conversation. One of the things when I was doing this, I found research that said married couples spend on average 36 hours a week watching TV and 20 minutes a week talking. So something to try is maybe just turn off the TV one night this week and see if you have a conversation with your spouse. I don't know, you could try it. But friends also pursue common interests and they have fun together. So don't allow all the stuff that there is, and there is so much stuff, and it's so easy to get lost in the stuff of life, the things that we have to get done, to rob you of having fun together, recreation with one another. All of that other stuff is not nearly as important as the friendship factor in marriage. Putting this message together made me realize even that for my own marriage, how much Angela and I can get lost in the kids and the working and all that kind of stuff, right? And I even sense that we are losing that sort of, enjoying our friendship that we once had with one another. And that's something that, I need to change, that we need to change. Because both of us, we want to build a marriage that stays strong through the entire race. And yet in any marriage or any significant relationship, these little things, these little foxes, over time will eat away at everything that is good. The tricky part is that it just doesn't happen all at once. But over time, if you allow it to happen, right? They stay in that garden, in your relationship, and the intimacy of that relationship will be destroyed. So do you have these, or do you sense these at work in your relationship? Unresolved conflict or hurt. Don't let the sun go down without trying to resolve that. A spirit of contempt or criticism. Deal with that one too. Change how you see, change the lens that you're looking at the other person in. Make it a lens of being generous, remembering what you loved about that person. So fill up the other person's love bank. Be positive and don't be so critical. That creeping divide, right? So talk about that one. Find ways that maybe you can spend some time together. Grow in that friendship that you once had with one another. The reality is that marriage, like any close relationship, is not easy over the long haul. But it is so worth it. And to do whatever it takes to make it and keep it healthy is something that we need to prioritize. So I'm just going to move to a time of prayer, but I was thinking for today is that maybe I'll give you a few moments of silent prayer. You know your life, your relationships, your marriage, and you know the things that maybe you need to pray about and bring before God better than I do. So I'll give you a few moments to pray, and then I'll close this off in a word after that. So let's pray.